vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific Ocean is a place of profound silence. It is a blue void where the horizon blurs the line between sea and sky. A place where secrets can be swallowed whole and kept for eternity. For nearly a century, this ocean has held onto one secret more tightly than any other. It is the final resting place of a legend, a mystery that has baffled investigators, historians, and forensic scientists since the summer of 1937. It is a story of ambition, of courage, and of a vanishing so absolute that it feels almost supernatural. Welcome to DCF Investigations. Today, we are not just recounting a history lesson. We are embarking on an exhaustive, deep-dive inquiry into the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. We will strip away the myths, analyze the minute-by-minute timeline of her final hours, examine the forensic evidence with modern scrutiny, and explore every shadow of doubt that lingers over her fate. To truly understand the gravity of this loss, we must first understand the world that Amelia Earhart inhabited and the colossal stature she held within it. In the 1930s, aviation was not merely a mode of transport, it was the frontier of human achievement. It was dangerous, glamorous, and largely dominated by men. Into this arena stepped Amelia Mary Earhart. Born in Atchison, Kansas, in 1897, she was a child of the turn of the century, raised in a time when women were expected to be domestic and demure. Amelia was neither. From a young age, she kept a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about women who succeeded in male-dominated fields. She saw her first plane at a state fair, a bundle of rusty wire and wood that failed to impress her initially. But a stunt flight years later in California changed the trajectory of her life. As the plane lifted off the ground, she knew she had to fly. Her rise to fame was meteoric. After Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic in 1927, the world was hungry for a female counterpart. Amelia, with her tousled hair and striking resemblance to Lindbergh, was perfectly cast for the role. But she was more than just a media creation. She was a skilled pilot who set altitude records and speed records. She became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, cementing her status as a global icon. By 1937, she was arguably the most famous woman in the world. She was close friends with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. She had her own fashion line. She was an educator and an advocate for women's rights. But the sky still called to her. She wanted one last great prize. She wanted to be the first woman to fly around the world. This mission was not just a flight, it was a statement. It was to be her swan song, the final major record before she settled into a life of teaching and writing. The aircraft chosen for this endeavor was the Lockheed Electra 10E, a state-of-the-art twin-engine monoplane. It was modified specifically for this journey. The windows were sealed over to make room for massive auxiliary fuel tanks that turned the fuselage into a flying gas station. This plane, dubbed the Flying Laboratory, was a marvel of engineering. But it was also a complex beast that required a delicate touch and precise navigation. Joining her was Fred Noonan, a man whose contribution is often overshadowed by Earhart's celebrity. Noonan was a former sea captain and a pioneer of aerial navigation. He had charted the routes for Pan Am's clipper ships across the Pacific. He was widely considered one of the best celestial navigators in the world. However, there were whispers about his reliability, specifically concerning alcohol. While friends and colleagues vehemently defended his professionalism in the air, The rumors persisted, adding a layer of tragic ambiguity to the mission. Together, Earhart and Noonan formed a team that seemed destined for glory. Their journey began in earnest in June 1937, departing from Miami and flying east. For weeks, they hopped across continents, tracing the equator. They flew through South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, on over the vast deserts of the Middle East, across India, and down through Southeast Asia. By late June, they had completed 22,000 miles of the 29,000-mile journey. They were exhausted. They had battled dysentery, mechanical issues, and the sheer physical toll of flying an unpressurized, loud aircraft for hours on end. When they landed in New Guinea on June 29, 1937, they were visibly fatigued. They were on the edge of the known world, staring down the most dangerous leg of the entire trip. The flight from Ley to Howland Island was a terrifying prospect. Howland Island is a tiny speck of coral and sand in the middle of the Central Pacific, barely 1.5 miles long and half a mile wide. Finding it from the air, after flying over 2,500 miles of open ocean, and it was akin to finding a grain of rice on a football field. To make matters worse, the navigation charts of the time were often inaccurate, positioning islands miles from their actual locations. On the morning of July 2nd, 1937, the atmosphere at the Ley airfield was tense. The Electra was loaded to capacity with fuel, so heavy that it required every inch of the runway to get airborne. Witnesses watched with bated breath as the plane lumbered down the dirt strip, dipping dangerously low over the water at the end of the runway before slowly climbing into the sky. It was 10 a.m. local time. They were airborne. They were heading east, toward the sunrise, and toward a rendezvous with destiny. This is where the timeline becomes the most scrutinized set of hours in aviation history. As Earhart and Noonan flew eastward, they were crossing time zones in the international date line. Their target, Howland Island, was being monitored by the United States Coast Guard cutter Itasca. The Itasca was there to provide radio support, weather updates, and a homing signal for the Electra to lock onto. But from the very beginning, there were problems. Communication was a disaster. It is crucial to understand the technology of 1937 to grasp why this failure occurred. Earhart was using a radio direction finder that required her to hear a signal to determine its direction. The Itasca was broadcasting, but Earhart and Noonan weren't hearing them clearly. There was a fundamental misunderstanding about frequencies. The Itasca was transmitting on frequencies that Earhart's equipment wasn't optimized for. Or perhaps she had turned down the sensitivity to block out static, inadvertently blocking out the lifeline she needed. Furthermore, before leaving Miami, Earhart had removed a trailing wire antenna because she felt it was too cumbersome. That wire was essential for picking up lower frequency signals. It was a decision made for convenience that may have cost them their lives. As the hours ticked by, the radio logs from the Itasca paint a picture of rising panic. At 2:45 a.m. Howland time, Earhart reported cloudy weather and overcast skies. This was critical because Noonan navigated by the stars. If he couldn't see the stars, he couldn't fix their position. They were flying blind in the dark. By sunrise, the situation was desperate. At 6:14 a.m., Earhart radioed that they were within 200 miles of the island, but couldn't see it. Her voice was described as calm but tense. Then came the messages that have haunted investigators for decades. At 7:42 a.m., Earhart's voice cut through the static, loud and clear, indicating she was close. She said, "We must be on you but cannot see you, but gas is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. The crew of the Itasca frantically tried to respond, firing up their boilers to create a smoke screen, hoping the black plume would be visible against the blue sky. But Earhart saw nothing. At 8:43 a.m., the final chilling transmission was received. Earhart said, "We are on the line 157337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6,210 kilocycles. Wait. This message is the key to the entire mystery. The line 157337 refers to a line of position, a navigational concept where the navigator knows they are somewhere along a specific line on the map, but not where along that line they are. This line ran through Howland Island, extending north-northwest and south-southeast. Earhart and Noonan were flying back and forth along this invisible highway, searching desperately for the island, burning their remaining fuel with every passing minute. And then, silence. The radio went dead. The Itasca called and called, but there was no answer. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were gone. The immediate reaction was a mix of confusion and mobilized force. The United States Navy and Coast Guard launched what was, at the time, the largest and most expensive search and rescue operation in history. President Franklin D. Roosevelt took a personal interest in the search, and the battleship Colorado and the aircraft carrier Lexington were dispatched. Planes scoured hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean. They looked for debris, for an oil slick, for a yellow life raft. They saw nothing. After weeks of searching, the official conclusion was reached. Amelia Earhart had run out of fuel, crashed into the ocean, and sunk. It was a tragic accident, a clean ending to a messy situation. But humans do not like clean endings when there is no body to bury. And so the theories began. For nearly 90 years, 3 primary theories have dominated the discourse, each with its own mountain of evidence and its own army of detractors. We must examine each of these with a critical eye, looking at the forensic plausibility and the historical context. The first theory is the crash and sink hypothesis. This is the official version, accepted by the U.S. government and many aviation experts. It posits that Earhart simply ran out of gas while searching for Howland Island. The Electra was heavy. Even if she ditched successfully, the plane would have likely broken up in the rough open ocean swells or sunk rapidly due to the weight of the engines. The ocean floor in that area is over 17,000 feet deep. Finding a plane at that depth is exponentially harder than finding the Titanic. Proponents of this theory point to the Occam's razor principle. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. She was lost, she was low on fuel, she crashed. However, this theory fails to account for the post-loss radio signals in the days following the disappearance. Our radio operators across the Pacific and even in the United States reported hearing distress calls. Many were dismissed as hoaxes, but some were deemed credible by the Navy at the time. These signals suggested that the plane was on land and able to run its right engine to power the radio. If the plane was underwater, the radio would not work. This leads us to the second and perhaps most compelling theory: the Gardner Island hypothesis. Gardner Island, now known as Nikumaroro, lies about 350 miles south-southeast of Howland Island. Remember the line of position Earhart mentioned? 157,337. if she flew south along that line, she would have run directly into Gardner Island. It is a coral atoll surrounding a lagoon. At low tide, there is a flat reef shelf that looks deceptively like a runway. The theory proposes that Earhart and Noonan, unable to find Howland, turned south and landed on the reef at Gardner Island. The evidence for this is extensive and unsettling. In 1940, 3 years after the disappearance, a British colonial officer named Gerald Gallagher established a settlement on Gardner Island. He found a partial human skeleton, a woman's shoe, and a sextant box. He suspected he had found Earhart. The bones were sent to Fiji for analysis. In 1941, a doctor named D.W. Hoodless examined them and concluded they belonged to a short, stocky male. The bones were subsequently lost, a tragic bureaucratic fumble that has hindered the investigation ever since. However, the story does not end there. In 1998, forensic anthropologists reanalyzed Hoodless's original measurements using modern computer databases. They found that the bones were actually much more likely to be those of a woman of Earhart's height and build. They concluded that the probability of the bones belonging to someone other than Earhart was less than 1%. This statistical analysis reignited the Gardner Island theory. Expeditions to Nikumaroro by groups like the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, or TIGAR, have uncovered more artifacts. They found pieces of a pocket knife consistent with one Earhart owned. They found a jar of freckle cream from the 1930s broken on the coral. Earhart was known to dislike her freckles. They found a piece of plexiglass that matches the exact curvature of the Electra's window. Perhaps most hauntingly, they found evidence of campfires and the remains of birds and turtles that appeared to have been eaten. The image this paints is horrific. Amelia Earhart, the world's darling, stranded on a scorching desert island, injured, starving, and dying of thirst, while the world searched for her just over the horizon. The radio signals heard in the days after the crash were likely her, calling out for help until the tide rose high enough to wash the plane off the reef and into the deep water, silencing the radio forever. But there is a darker theory, one born of the geopolitical tensions of the late 1930s. This is the Japanese capture theory. In 1937, the Pacific was a powder keg. Japan was expanding its empire, and the United States was watching closely. Some believe that Earhart was not just on a round-the-world flight, but was actually on a covert spy mission for the U.S. government. The theory suggests she was asked to fly over the Japanese-held Marshall Islands to photograph military installations. According to this narrative, Earhart was either forced down by Japanese fighters or crashed near one of their islands. She and Noonan were then captured, taken to Saipan, and imprisoned. Over the years, dozens of witnesses in Saipan have come forward claiming to have seen a white woman and a man in the late 1930s. Some claim to have seen them in jail cells. Others claim to have seen their execution. There are stories of Earhart's plane being burned and pushed off a cliff. This theory gained massive traction in the decades following World War II, fueled by the anti-Japanese sentiment of the era. However, it lacks hard physical evidence. The flight path required to reach the Marshall Islands would have been a significant deviation from her course. Furthermore, the U.S. government has declassified thousands of documents related to the search, and there is no smoking gun indicating a spy mission. A photograph surfaced a few years ago claiming to show Earhart and Noonan on a dock in the Marshall Islands. but it was quickly debunked when investigators found the same photo in a Japanese travel book published years before the flight. While the capture theory makes for a gripping spy thriller, the evidence remains largely anecdotal. There are even more fringe theories. Some believe Earhart survived, returned to the U.S. under a new identity as Irene Bolam, and lived out her days in New Jersey. This theory has been thoroughly debunked. With facial recognition and forensic analysis proving Bolam was a different woman. Yet it speaks to the public's desperate desire for her to have survived. So, where does the investigation stand today? We are in the golden age of deep-sea exploration, and the search for Amelia Earhart has shifted from the surface to the abyss. In 2024, a company called Deep Sea Vision made headlines around the world. Using advanced sonar technology, they scanned nearly 5,000 square miles of the ocean floor near Howland Island. They released a sonar image that shows a plane-shaped anomaly resting at a depth of 16,000 feet. The shape bears a striking resemblance to the Lockheed Electra, with the correct wingspan and tail configuration. This discovery has electrified the community. Is this the final answer? Is the plane sitting there, preserved in the cold, dark, oxygen-poor depths, waiting to be found? If it is the Electra, it would validate the crash and sink theory. It would mean that Earhart and Noonan died on impact, or shortly after, sparing them the lingering horror of the castaway scenario. But until a submersible goes down there with cameras to verify the serial numbers, we cannot know for sure. The forensic analysis also continues. Scientists are looking at the possibility of retrieving DNA from soil samples on Nikumaroro, hoping that perhaps some trace of Earhart remains in the campfires or the artifacts. We are using techniques today that were science fiction in 1937. We are reanalyzing the radio propagation models to see exactly where those distress calls could have originated. Every scrap of paper, every logbook entry, every witness statement is being digitized and cross-referenced. Why does this case still captivate us? Why, after all these years, do we still look at the sky and wonder? It is because Amelia Earhart represents something that we fear we have lost. She represents a time when the world was still big, when there were still blank spots on the map, and when a single person's courage could capture the imagination of the entire planet. Her disappearance is a locked-room mystery on a global scale. It reminds us that no matter how much technology we possess, nature is still vast, powerful, and capable of keeping its secrets. We have walked through the life of a pioneer, the stress of the final flight, the terror of the empty radio, and the decades of searching. We have looked at the possibility of a watery grave, a lonely death on a coral atoll, and a tragic end in a prison cell. The truth may be one of these, or it may be something we haven't even conceived of yet. The ocean is deep, and history is long. As we conclude this file, the sonar drones are being prepped for another dive. The archivists are turning another page. The mystery of Amelia Earhart is not dead, it is very much alive. It demands our attention. It demands to be solved. This has been a DCF investigation. We dig deeper because the truth is rarely on the surface. Now, I want to hear from you. Based on the evidence regarding the radio signals and the sonar anomaly, do you believe Earhart died in the crash? Or did she survive as a castaway on Gardner Island? The answer might change how we view her final days. Leave your analysis in the comments below. Until next time, stay observant.